Thanks for joining us today on Cece and Doc Talk, where we talk about everything under the sun. You never know quite what you're going to get, but you'll always be entertained.
Welcome to today's episode of Cece and Doc Talk. Shit floats. That's the title for today. Now, I'm going to just rip on people. Now, you don't know who I'm thinking of or who I'm ripping on, but if it resonates with you, then that's your problem, and you better take a look at it. Because I'm going to talk about shit floats is all about terrible leaders who rise to the top. And what gets them there? I mean, literally. I mean, the shit just rises to the top.
Well, you don't have to tell me. That's why I left corporate America years ago and started my own business.
Yeah. And so I think about how many hours, days, years I spent just justifying my existence, proving ROI. You know, how do you make sure that you're adding value? I remember one time a manager asked me, I had to provide all these reports, I need to be adding value. And I said, do you love your wife? So obviously I was talking to a male on this one, but not necessarily, but anyhow, moving on. Anyway, and I said, do you love your wife? And he says, yes. And I said, prove it to me. How do you measure that? Can you measure that? I suppose you can give me a report. Do you want to work on that? I said, sometimes it just is. And sometimes you have to live with the fact that it just is. I remember trying to put a report together that ties knowledge, skills, and abilities to the organizational effectiveness. So, right, there's only two ways that you can affect the bottom line in an organization. Bring in more money or spend less. Well, then you look at the organizational goals that they set up to do that. What do we want to do? Well, increase sales, decrease expenditures, get more efficient. And then you look at what's the business line goals, and then what are the individual goals? And then you could take the individual goals and break them down into knowledge, skills, and abilities. And then we could do training around that. I mean, I spent oodles of hours trying to justify the value add. And if you know what, and you want my opinion, and again, this is my podcast, so I could say anything I want. Get rid of the top couple layers in an organization, flatten the fucker out, and don't make people spend half of their time justifying their existence,
tracking
their time and what they're doing. That is a waste of time because we're all doing it to the shit that rose to the top. That are half of them are incompetent anyway.
Well, or they're not paying attention, or because and they do that because they don't have people who are willing to tell them what's really happening because they're, so high up on the ladder. And so they don't really know what's going on. So they want all these metrics to see if they can determine what's going on. But metrics aren't human.
They're bean counters. So guess what I did? I gave them beans to count. And then I went and did my job. Right? And then there's some leaders that have never actually done the client meetings. They've never actually been hands-on with the clients. They're just bean counters. Drove me crazy.
Well,
anyway.
You and I have seen any number of people rise through the ranks who had zero experience and zero skill sets in the areas that they were rising in the ranks of, while we watched other people who were highly skilled and qualified get passed over
time
for those
and
jobs.
time
so
again.
The people who actually knew what the job was and were great leaders got passed over for the people who didn't know anything that somebody was trying to groom to ultimately get them to the top.
Because you have number people hiring numbers people, but when you have people that just have that emotional intuition, well, you can't prove that. So why would, that's not a good leader. But yet they have the greatest knowledge and intuition and empathetic awareness of the impact that they have, or the change that the organization does, the impact that it has on the clients and the patients and the end user.
Well, and to put this into context, you and I have always worked in fields where it's very difficult to assess ROI. You've worked in the emotional side of wealth space, so that's not as tangible. You can't count those beans, right? I mean, how do you measure the level of emotion and the level of distress that you diffuse in a family as they move into, family financial planning for the next 100 years? It's not something that you can quantify.
Right, in the majority of families where they transfer wealth from one generation to the next, they end up with some sort of dysfunction because of the lack of communication and lack of vision around the wealth and around the family staying together. And they end up with terrible family dynamics that are, a lot of times, they never overcome for generation after generation. The cousins see it, and that's what they're modeling. And so how do you measure the fact that we kept a family together? How do we measure that that we kept communication lines open, that we allowed people to stay together for generations.
Right. There's not a tracking system or an Excel spreadsheet for that.
But I sure tried.
Well, that's because you were forced into that little box that we talked about.
But I spent a lot of time doing that versus my client work.
Right, exactly. So there's the thing, right? So, it just, we spend so much time, and you and I watched this happen in another organization. We went from this amazing organization where we all, we had fun at work, and obviously that's not the only criteria. We had fun at work, but we were great at our work. We were part of high performing teams. All of us really were engaged in our jobs. We knew how to make other people
psychological
be engaged.
Safety.
Totally.
Oh my gosh, I'm big on that.
And then little by little, we all started to have to be more accountable for our time. So, you spend 8 hours training in a classroom, and then you're expected to go home or to your hotel and spend another 4 hours doing email. Well,
tracking your time.
That's 12 hours, folks.
Yeah, well, then
and
you have to do
it.
your reports to track all that
right.
time.
So then you have to spend 2 hours tracking every single minute. I remember at one point, like almost every minute of your time had to be accounted for. And these are salaried employees, by the way. So, salaried, well-educated, well-experienced employees. And so it's completely demoralizing for the employees as well as the clients that they serve, because at some point, you're no longer taking care of the employees. The employees are then not going to be motivated to take care of the clients, and the whole system breaks down. And we've seen so much of that happen during this stretch of the pandemic, although you and I have been watching it happen for years. And so the title of this podcast, Shit Floats, actually comes from the fact that at one point we said, if we write another book, it's going to be called Shit Floats, and it's going to be about this mess that is corporate America and how people rise to the top.
We're incompetent leaders. Well, in terms of
emotional intelligence,
yes.
And in terms incompetence in terms of emotional intelligence,
and the ability to motivate and inspire people,
right?
From that perspective, as a leader,
right?
You can manage. That's different.
And I recognize this sounds very jaded. We know that there are a handful of good leaders out there, and I'm going to say a handful, and we know a couple of them, and they're great at what they do, and they really care about what's happening. And so but you and I always worked in that field where things were not measurable. So, we worked in learning and development. Again, how do you measure the ROI of shifting a mindset?
Yes. Oh, that's a paradigm shift. There's another buzzword. Yeah.
Oh my God, I hate that buzzword. And it's so funny because I thankfully I escaped corporate America when that buzzword was rising to the top, and then all of a sudden it made a resurgence a few years ago. But now there's a few others that I absolutely hate.
And then you got this decentralization of everything, and then the decentralization of everything, and then the centralization of everything, and then the decentralization, and then you end up working for different managers along the way, and you could have 6 different managers, but you still do the exact same job. I mean, it's just anyway. And the whole matrix reporting thing. And then the other thing that I think is just really important here is that it really all comes back to trust, right? So, let's go back to the pandemic situation, right? Everybody assumed that as soon as people shifted to working from home, they weren't really working, which is for a while why everybody wanted to be back in the office, because, I have to see you working. And yet, when I worked in an office, when you worked in an office, I spent half my time, making small talk with people who walk by your cubicle. And as far as I was concerned, that was valuable in terms of connecting with people, but I couldn't get shit done at the office. I had to go home and work 6 more hours to get shit done. So you might as well just let me work at home. Yeah, managing the expectations around time. I remember flying into the airport, you got up to catch a 6 a.m. flight, so you had to get up in whatever time zone you were at 2 a.m. to get there at 4 a.m. And by the time you got to the Denver, and now it's only noon. Right? Well, they would expect me to come back in the office. And I'm like, wait a minute, I've already been up for 20 fucking hours. I mean, I'm tired. I'm going to go home. I can unpack my bag. I can get some stuff done at home, but I don't need to go into the office just to make an appearance. But
again,
the whole pandemic
it comes back to trust, right? So you and I,
you want to talk about the 4 elements of trust real quick?
That's where I was going. Go ahead.
All right. So they come from the Thin Book of Trust, and they are reliability. Does somebody do what they say they're going to do?
Right.
Do they get the job done? If you share the expectations and they get it done, it's reliable, right? They say they're going to be there and they're there, they do it. That's reliability.
Competence. So competence obviously is, are you competent to do the job? Is somebody competent to do the job? Do you trust that they are?
Yeah, and sincerity is a third one. Sincerity is all about, are you authentic? Are you real? Are you approachable? How sincere are you?
And the most important one, which seems strange to everybody who we mention this to, is care.
Absolutely, care. People may or may not remember what you do, but they will always remember how you made them feel.
And I don't care what color they are on the real colors or what temperament they are, there's still feelings in there somewhere, and we hit on people's emotions.
Which leads to feedback, by the way. We're going to do a totally separate one on feedback, on how to give feedback, because there's an art to it that really keeps the wind in people's sails and motivates them to go the extra mile, to give their best. But one little conversation can take the wind out of somebody's sail for their career lifetime.
Absolutely.
And so care, what you say and how you care. So there's another area around shit floats that I want to venture into. So is there anything more that you want to do around the trust?
I think my final word on the trust piece is just that these leaders are choosing not to trust employees, which ultimately impacts the employees, and it erodes the entire system eventually. And so, all of these little measures to micromanage my time, my energy, where am I at? What am I doing? Who am I meeting with? What minute to minute sort of accountability level is ridiculous. And they don't realize how much time it takes to have to account for all of those things on their tracking and spreadsheets and whatever. And so it makes for a terrible work environment that doesn't empower people to do what they do best.
Absolutely. And so, okay, in a moment, I think we should do a list, just you and I rattle off, not just, the characteristics of a bad leader.
Oh, that'll be fun.
But I actually want to take it to a deeper level. I mean, you could do a poor listener or whatever like that, but take it to a deeper level where it's like, what are they afraid of? Right. What is the deep, what's the ego afraid of?
Oh, I think so much of it stems from fear.
But there's a couple other things, leaders that really are just taking up a seat on the bus and really aren't contributing.
Right.
And they just, it's like, well, I'm empowering my people, but you're also you're not doing anything. And from my perspective,
just because you can delegate doesn't make you a good leader.
Right.
It also might make
sometimes you have
lazy.
to decide, are you a player and a coach, or are you just the coach? And sometimes when you have short staff, you have to be a player and a coach. Right. And you have to get in there, as opposed to, it's like, I have this great idea. I have a really good idea. Here's a blank sheet of paper. Will you fill it out for me? And then I can then turn it in and get all the credit for this. And I remember one time I asked a leader, I'm like, are you going to provide a template for us to complete? No, you all can figure it out. Well, then we all figured something out completely differently, submitted it, and then it hands it off to somebody else to put it together. It's like, how inefficient. And my gosh, you're the manager of this team. Put together some thoughts, ideas, a template, a straw model, something. Oh my God. But just these blank sheets of paper for us to fill out, you got it. Well, thanks for trusting us. I do have to say that. Thanks for trusting us. But it was incredibly inefficient.
But the other side of that is that then when you can't read their mind, then they want to come back and micromanage how you do something because you didn't do it the way that they wanted you to do it.
Because they do have something in their head.
But they never shared what that was.
Right.
So back to one of my favorite sayings, unspoken expectations are predetermined resentments. So then you get a whole bunch of pissed off employees that really don't want to help you with shit after that.
Put a structure around it.
Absolutely.
And another one, and again, I have a lot of really good bosses that are friends to this day. And so
they don't fall in this category.
Yeah. I'm looking outside that. There was one time I was incredibly exhausted and I was begging for additional resources, and it didn't happen. And I ended up leaving that job. And it wasn't until after I left the job that the manager goes, okay, I get it now. I should have listened.
Too late.
And at that point, it's too late. And we're seeing that again now.
Right.
Because, the team that I just left is begging to replace my position. They're begging to have additional resources. And they're going to end up, who knows what they're going to do with my position. And it's going to lead to burnout. It's not a good environment. Don't make your employees beg for resources when they're on the road to burnout.
Right. And if you really can't afford the resources and you're not just being greedy, if you really can't afford the resources, then reduce the workload. Absolutely. Or
there's going to be delayed and unhappy people because there's only so many hours in the day. You can work a half a day, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. or 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. Which half of the day you want to work? These people are already working just incredible amount of hours.
Well, and if you're people like us, and if you're people like my sister, there's that level of responsibility that keeps you working even when you're exhausted. The continuing to put in, 12-hour days, and working from home, essentially creates an environment where you have a lack of boundaries to start with, because it's just so fluid to go from your bed to your computer to the back to the computer, back to the whatever. You're always on your computer and you're always working, and so the boundaries are already blurred when you're working from home, and then you have managers who just push and push and push
blurred
and push.
lines. Yeah. So, all right, you want to get into characteristics of terrible shit float leaders.
Shit float
but I want to
leaders.
do it from the deeper. What are they afraid of? That their ego's going to get bruised?
Well, I mean, I think that's true. I think so many leaders are just really afraid that their employees are going to show them up somehow.
So all of a sudden their lack of competency will come through in some way?
Well, the leader's lack of competency,
Right,
sure.
the leader's lack of competency.
Yeah, absolutely. I think leaders are sometimes afraid that,
so they're not vulnerable.
Their employees may show them up, that they might make themselves look better than them. And, and I think fear of vulnerability is huge among leaders. I mean, you and I have always talked about how important it is to be an authentic leader. In fact, I think if you're going to, list leadership qualities, like the top 3 or 5 leadership qualities, authenticity is right up there at the top.
As the good ones. You're now switching from the bad list to
right,
the good ones.
As the good list. The authenticity is right up there at the top. And I think
and
on the bad list,
would be on the good list.
On the bad list, so many leaders are afraid to be authentic. They think they have to be this like superhuman person with this armor
Sometimes
on.
they actually think they have to be this asshole,
right,
or a bitch in terms of how they approach things, that with this command and control style.
Well, and that speaks a lot to women. I think you and I can attest to this coming up in the old school, work world for the last, 25 years or so. I've definitely felt pressure from time to time to behave differently as a woman in order to be able to get along with the men. So sometimes you do behave a little tougher than really, because and then of course you get slapped in the face.
Yeah,
you get slapped in the face with that, because then you get dinged on your annual review for being too assertive, as if women aren't allowed to be that. But I think we breed competition between women, and women should be supporting each other in the
workplace.
Women
should always support.
But we have women throwing each other under the bus.
It's already been a tough road.
Women throwing each other under the bus because they're trying to survive in a man's world. And it's just, the whole thing is just, ugh.
Yeah. All right, what else?
That's my technical term for the day.
Ugh. Well, that goes right there with shit, so. All right, what else are they afraid of? There's a fear of
Connecting.
Fear of connecting. They don't know how to connect. They don't know how to care.
Lack
that goes
of
back to the
intelligence.
lack of emotional intelligence. They don't know how to care. They don't know how to give feedback. Fear of being able to talk in a way that is motivating. It's easier to degrade somebody than it is to build them up. It's easier to not take what is their role in helping make somebody successful. It's easier to just get rid of people.
Right.
Take somebody that's an underperformer and make them a top performer. That takes work on the part of a leader.
Totally.
And there's also a fear of diversity of thought.
Oh.
Or diversity in general. Oh my gosh, leaders that, they may not say this, but they really don't like strong women, or they don't like how ethnic diversity approaches things from a different perspective.
Yeah.
And so it's just easier to keep it as, I'm just going to hire people that look like me, sound like me, talk like me, think like me, educated like me, or whatever it is. And that does not produce the best results.
It absolutely doesn't. And back to the diversity of thought thing. I mean, there are leaders who, and the worst leader in my mind is the one that pretends like they want to hear what you have to say, and then basically discounts it all and goes and does whatever the hell they want anyway. And then they come back with some lame excuse like, well, I had to present it differently to the board, or give me a fucking break.
Stand up for your people. All right, so...
Oh, that's it. People who aren't willing to stand up for their people because they don't want to take a hit, so they know
they're not
the
willing
ultimate...
to fall on the sword for you.
Right, exactly. They don't want to take a hit, so they'd rather throw you under the bus than to take the hit themselves. And in fact, a great leader is somebody who will fall on their sword for their employees.
Absolutely.
Even if the employee's wrong, they should be...
And standing behind employees if they make a mistake.
You deal with the employees separately, but you still present a united front to leadership.
Absolutely.
And then you coach and you manage, separately.
All right,
with
so now that we're
issues.
going to flush these leaders down the toilet and get rid of these shitty ass leaders, what makes a great leader? And let's and we're going to kind of maybe just wrap up on this, because apparently I can go on forever, and you have some. You've been out of the corporate world for 20 years, and these are just popping up for you like it's a whack-a-mole.
Well, I may have been out of the corporate world for 20 years, but I have been still working with the corporate world as clients, and I listen to pretty much every call you've been on, if not for the last 2 years, the last 20. So, I'm still exposed to it on a really
you do a lot
basis.
of executive coaching, and you're working with leaders, and then some leaders that are told that they need coaching.
Many of the leaders I work with are very good leaders. I will say that.
Agree.
We are very fortunate.
And especially when you're done working with them.
Right.
Yes. Teaching them to be vulnerable.
Well, yeah. Because
encouraging them to be vulnerable. Having a vision.
Right.
All right, so let's do it. All right, having a vision.
Empowering them to be who they really are as a leader, and to be genuine and authentic leaders. I love nothing more than when a coaching engagement ends and a leader goes off to like be their greatness, but not necessarily the kind of greatness that's like haughty and boasting and bragging, but the kind that's like quiet authentic greatness that empowers other people and realizes that they will shine if their employees shine.
Well, and there's that whole Gandhi thing about the leadership is like, where are my people going? I must follow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So great leaders. Is that
great leaders. I would say for me, it's, having that inspiring vision. I remember the CEO of Wells Fargo saying, people will follow a leader that's optimistic, not goofy optimistic, but optimistic. In other words, we can get through the tough times. We can make this happen if we pull together, just being optimistic. And that was way back when there was the merger between Wells Fargo and Norwest.
Yeah. And I still go back to integrity and authenticity. You have to be accessible. And I think, while I believe that you and I were both very accessible, very real leaders, we recognized that when we each went through divorces, and we realized that impacted our work life for a while, because, hey, life happens, shit happens, life falls event. You go through a divorce, you realize you're not doing your best work. Sometimes you have to, I remember going to my team and going, here's the deal. Here's what's happening in my life. I need your help right now. I need y'all to kind of step up and help me, help us get through this stretch while I'm trying to focus on work and, dealing with the fallout that is my divorce. Right. And then the other time that I remember, and I remember them just rallying, right? Like they were so happy, first of all, to know the truth, to know what was happening, because they could sense that something was happening in my world. But then to be able to help, they were really happy to be able to step in and go, hey, we got this right now. And then the other event was, when you and I got together as a couple, we worked on the same team, and shocker, you were my boss, and that's a whole different story, but we handled that very ethically, went to our boss and said, hey, here's the deal. And we figured that all out. But when we approached the team, about the team that you managed and some of whom I managed, and we came out as a couple after previously being seen as heterosexual, we were terrified, and yet they rallied around us like never before. And then it was amazing the stuff that they shared with us after that.
All of a sudden it's like, if you could tell me that you're gay, I can tell you about my hangnail. All of a sudden they just really opened up and shared. But that was a very vulnerable moment. Because again, coming out as being gay over 20 years ago was a different story.
So great leadership ability, quality is to be willing to be vulnerable sometimes, and knowing that connects you with people more than sometimes putting up that shield or that wall.
Yeah. And I can't stress enough in terms of being a great leader is the power of creating an environment where there's psychological safety. And what do I mean by that? Psychological safety is where anybody on the team can say anything that they want or that they need to say without any fear of repercussions, or that there's going to be any sort of gossip. Hey, did you hear what this person said? Or harboring resentments. And so that there's this just pure open collaboration, open dialogue, open sharing, and it's all in the name of that you really are curious and want to hear and want to know what others are saying, and you can incorporate that in, and you can learn from one another. And to create an environment where there's psychological safety is tough to do. It takes open, authentic communication. So, all right. So to wrap it up here, what I'd like to do is just if I were to ask somebody, think of the best manager or the best leader that you've ever had, do you come to mind? Or if I were to ask them, think of the worst leader that you've ever had, do you come to mind? And the biggest thing for you to do is you have to have conscious day-by-day behavior to make sure that you come to people's mind as the best leader they've ever had, and you need to stay off that shit list of the worst leader that they ever have, because that's an easy one to be on. On that note, I'm done.
One of the skills. You could tell that this is a really, really passionate topic for Doc, who just retired from corporate America after 25 years. So, she's definitely got.
Get your shit together, leaders. Come on, step up. Don't be in there. Love your employees.
Don't be a turd floating in the toilet.
Like a turd in the Punchbowl.
Exactly. Right. So one of the exercises that we always put leaders through, especially when we're doing coaching with them, is we ask them to write down 3 words that they want other people to use when describing them. And this is a powerful exercise because they really have to shift out of their own internal mindset and think about, how do they want to be seen by others? How do they want to be perceived? Because perception is 99% of reality. And so we ask them to do that, and then we really get nitty-gritty with them, and we ask them to start writing down specific behaviors and actions that they're willing to commit to every day that allow them to be seen and described that way. And it's a fantastic exercise for leaders. And I would encourage you, if you're a leader, to do it. You know what? If you're a parent, do it. If you're a coach, do it.
What 3 words do you want others to use to describe you?
Yep.
And by the way, do you know your 3 words?
I like to be seen as, I would like for people to describe me as dynamic.
Yep.
I would like for people to see me as compassionate. Somebody who really values that compassion and respect of others. And also, what's my 3rd one these days? I do like for people to see me as, somebody who's willing to kind of think out of the box and be more adventurous and have that more kind of eclectic mentality that's willing to embrace a number of different ways of thinking, I think.
Okay.
How about you?
Well, I've had the same 3 words for 20 years. I've actually been in corporate world
longer. I think mine
just
changed.
The banking world was 20 years.
That actually was hard for me to answer because I think mine have changed. And so those were kind of all new. Anyway, go
All
ahead.
right, my 3 words have been for a very, very long time. Charismatic. Do you know what it's like to be living in a charismatic manner day after day, every day, which is the same as day after day, every day? To be charismatic, you can't make a mistake.
That's exhausting.
Charismatic, outgoing, so out of the box thinking, upbeat, energetic, and that was my last one, is to be energetic.
Yeah.
And even when I was having kind of one of those, I'm so tired, I would rally, and it's like, nope, I have the energy, and let's do this. So, and that's the passion. So that's kind of the passionate part of it. And
I think it's interesting that you said that those haven't changed, because it will be interesting to see a year after retirement if they do.
Well, I'll let you know.
So we'll reconnect in a year and have you do your 3 words again.
All right. What are your 3 words?
Have a great day, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to Cece and Doc Talk. We'd love for you to follow us on social media at Cece and Doc. That's CCNDOC. And you can visit our website at ccandoc.com. We also take monthly donations to support this broadcast if you're so inclined. We'd love to hear your comments, suggestions, and questions, and we'll do our best to respond. Thanks, and have a fantabulous day.